Hey everyone, if you've got a Sony camera and you're struggling to work out how to set a shutter speed longer than 30 seconds, this video is for you. You might need to set a shutter speed longer than 30 seconds if you're doing astrophotography, perhaps you're doing landscape photography in really low light, or you might be using an ND filter to create photos with really long exposures. In this video, I'm going to show you two ways to set a shutter speed longer than 30 seconds. The first is absolutely free, and the second requires buying a bit of additional hardware. Let's go. If you've got a Sony camera, you might have seen that when you alter the shutter speed, it gets longer and longer, at 20 seconds, 25 seconds, 30 seconds. But then if you try and go longer than 30 seconds, it just changes to bulb. So there's no way to pre-program an exposure longer than 30 seconds. The first way you can do this is to actually make use of a free app and then use that app to control the exposure. Sony has their own app called Imaging Edge Mobile that you can use to control the camera, but to be honest, it's not the best app in the world, and I tried to use it a few times and just didn't seem to connect to the camera very well, or it's not particularly user-friendly in my opinion. Instead, I make use of an app called Camera. This is a completely free app to use the basic functions, including the ability to set a shutter speed longer than 30 seconds. To get this to work, you need to come into your camera's setup, come over to the network menu, and first of all, make sure that aeroplane mode is not turned on, and make sure Wi-Fi is enabled. We're going to use the phone to connect to the camera's Wi-Fi, and it controls the camera via this Wi-Fi connection. So once you've made sure that your Wi-Fi is enabled on the camera, you need to go and download and install the Camera app from the App Store, and you can connect manually to your camera's Wi-Fi point using the SSID and password here. But a quicker way to do this is to try and connect via NFC. So we're just going to tap Connect via NFC here, and then we need to hold the phone up to the camera. You can see this little symbol here, and basically you just need to hold the phone up to it until it makes the connection. This can be a little bit annoying to actually get it to work. You might need to move the phone around a little bit to actually find out how to make it connect. So when it finds the NFC spot, you'll get a little vibration on the phone, and you'll see this prompt. Camera wants to join the network. This is the network of the Wi-Fi network of the camera itself. So just tap join, and then you should see your camera show up here, and then just tap connect. And then you should see a live view of your camera. So here we are recording. It's a live view of the A7S III that I'm recording on now. Let's just put this down over here. Okay, so now you've got the camera and the app connected together, you can go and use it to set shutter speeds longer than 30 seconds. So you've got this drop down here. If I just tap that, you've got different modes. We're currently on photo mode. What you want to do is go and select bulb mode here. And if you tap this little settings icon, you can either use a predefined bulb speed or a manual bulb speed. Let's just leave the predefined shutter speed turned off and click done. And now to actually take a bulb exposure, you tap this shutter release button once, and you can see the timer here. Tap it again to stop. So that's how you can manually stop and start, and then you could count in your head to 30 seconds or 40 seconds or 50 seconds, for example, but that's obviously a bit annoying. What you can also do is hit this settings wheel here, turn on predefined mode, and then tap the shutter speed here, and then set a shutter speed whatever you want. So for example, say we wanted a 42-second exposure, just hit done. And then to start the bulb exposure, just tap once, and then this will automatically record a 42-second exposure. And when that countdown's finished, the exposure will end. So I just got 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, and that's the exposure finished. So that's a free way you can set a shutter speed longer than 30 seconds by just setting a predefined shutter speed. And you also want to make sure that the camera's on bulb setting. To do this, just rotate the shutter speed until you go past 30 seconds and you see it say bulb. The second way to get a shutter speed longer than 30 seconds is to use some kind of remote control such as this. This particular one is by JJC, and I'll put a link in the description to this exact version. This version also comes with this remote attachment, so you can also trigger the shutter speed remotely from a distance if you want to, but you don't have to. You can just use a shutter release cable such as this, plug it in to the unit and also to the camera and control it that way. So you don't have to use the remote portion. It's just that this particular set that I got also includes the remote controller or the remote commander. To set this up, make sure you turn the camera off first, and then go and take the shutter release cable here. You'll need to get the specific shutter release cable for whatever camera you're using, and also make sure that if you order this particular remote, that it either comes with the correct shutter cable for the camera you're using, or be sure to order the shutter cable separately. So basically what you do is take the shutter release cable here, plug it into the socket, and then plug this end into the camera. So we'll just grab the Sony A7R IV here, and we'll go and plug this in to the multi-socket here. We can now go and use this remote control to remotely trigger the shutter. So once you've got everything connected, turn on the camera and turn on the remote. Make sure your shutter speed is set to bulb mode in the camera, and then you can use this remote. I won't go into all of the different functions of this remote because it offers a lot more than just a simple shutter release. For example, you can do intervals if you're shooting time lapses, and you can also set delays and that kind of thing. So now the camera's set to bulb mode and we've got everything plugged in and turned on. If you want to take a long exposure longer than 30 seconds, the first thing you could do is just hold down this shutter button here. And while you've got this button held down, the shutter remains open and you can just count and you can see the actual time telling us how long the exposure's gone for. And to stop the exposure, just take your finger off the button and that's the end of the exposure. If you don't want to physically hold down the button, what you can do is push it in and then slide it up, and this will lock it in place so you don't have to continually press the button. And then when the counter reaches whatever exposure you want, you just slide it back down and that's the end of the exposure. If you want to set a predefined exposure, you can do that. What you want to do is use these buttons here. Just come across to BU and then choose hours, minutes and seconds for your exposure. So for example, say we wanted to do a 37-second exposure. Set this to 37, hit the middle button to lock that in, and then simply hit this stop button here, and that will start the exposure. And notice that the exposure counts down, telling us how long we've got left till it finishes. So we're currently on 27, 26, 25, 24. And when this gets down to 0, the shutter will close again and that will be the end of the exposure. So that's the exposure complete. You can also attach this thing to the hot shoe of the camera, attach the cable to this port here, and then simply use this unit to remotely control the camera. But I think if I was just doing long exposures or landscape photography, I'd probably just use it in this wired way so I didn't have to carry this extra thing around. I'll just put this down and then I'll quickly go through some pros and cons to each approach. But first, if you like this video, don't forget to click the like button and maybe leave me a comment. And also, if you want to learn more about using Sony cameras, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's take a look at some of the pros and cons now. So the biggest pro for using the Camrote app is that it's absolutely free. If you want to do some of the extra functions like time-lapse, then you will have to pay for the upgraded version. But if you want to just do shutter speeds longer than 30 seconds, that's included in the free version. We also don't need to carry around any extra hardware other than the phone, of course. And you can also use the app to remotely control the aperture and ISO of the camera. When it comes to cons, obviously you're going to need your phone on you, and you're also going to need a charged battery in your phone to be able to use the app. You're also going to need Wi-Fi turned on the camera. This might use up your battery more quickly. And as you saw, sometimes it's a bit hard to get the actual Wi-Fi connection set up between the phone and the camera. It's a bit flaky sometimes, and it can be a bit of a faff. Obviously, if we're using the app, we can't use the phone for other things during the exposure. For example, you might want to fly around a drone or make a phone call. You can't do this if you're using the app to control the camera. When it comes to using the external remote, the pros are that it's a lot easier to set up. You basically just need to plug it in and then go. You don't need Wi-Fi enabled on the camera, which means your camera battery should last a bit longer. It's a lot simpler to set up than having to pair the app to the camera. And if you don't want to carry your phone around with you when you're taking photos, obviously if you're not using an app, you don't need your phone. And it doesn't matter if your phone battery's charged either. The battery in the remote will probably last a lot longer than the phone anyway. It also means we can use the phone for other things while we're shooting photos. And depending on the remote release you've got, we get other features like the ability to use an intervalometer to shoot time-lapse. When it comes to the cons of the external remote, the most obvious one is we actually need to buy it, and that will cost money. It's also an extra thing to carry around in the camera bag, and this particular remote also requires 2 AAA batteries. The other minor con is that if you're using the wired approach and you're not using that remote controller part, you'll need to find a way to attach the remote to the tripod so it just doesn't hang around and blow all over the place. I hope you found that video useful. If you did, please feel free to leave me a comment or click the like button. And if you want more videos on filmmaking, photography and gear, including a lot of videos about Sony cameras, make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications today. See ya!